what is the nature of the meaning crisis in modern times? What's its origin? What's its explanation?
Well, remember what I said, what I argued, that the very processes that make us adaptively intelligent subject us to perennial problems of self-deception, self-destruction, creating bullshit for ourselves, for other people, all of that. And that can cause, anxiety, existential anxiety. It can cause despair. It can cause a sense of absurdity. These are perennial problems. And across cultures and across historical periods, human beings have come up with ecologies of practices. There's no one practice. There's no panacea practice. They've come up with ecologies of practices for ameliorating that self-deception and enhancing that fittedness, that connectedness that's at the core of meaning in life. That's prototypically what we call wisdom. And here's how I can show you one clear instance of the meaning crisis. It's a wisdom famine. I do this regularly with my students. In the classroom, I'll say, where do you go for information? They hold up their phone. Where do you go for knowledge? They're a little bit slower, and probably because they're in my class, they'll say, well, science, the university. And I'll say, where do you go for wisdom? And there's a silence. Wisdom isn't optional. That's why it is perennial, cross-cultural, cross-historical, because of the perennial problems. But we do not have homes for ecologies of practices that fit into our scientific, technological worldview so that they are considered legitimate. The fastest growing demographic group are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S's. They have no religious allegiance, but they are not primarily atheistic. They most frequently describe themselves with this has become almost everybody now described, I'm spiritual but not religious. Mm-hmm. Which means they are trying to find a way of reducing the bullshit and enhancing the connectedness, but they don't want to turn to any of the legacy established religions by and large.
Well, isn't both religion and the nuns, isn't wisdom a process, not a destination? So trying to find, if you're a deeply faithful religious person, you're also trying to find, right? So just because you have a place where you're looking, or a set of traditions around which you're constructing the search, it's nevertheless a search. And isn't so? I guess, is there a case to be made that this is just the usual human condition? How do you answer if you ask 5 centuries ago, where do you look for wisdom? I mean, I suppose people would be more inclined to answer, well, the Bible or a religious text.
Right. And they had a worldview that was considered not just religious, but also rational. So we now have these two things, orthogonal or often oppositional, spirituality and rationality. But if you go before a particular historical period, you look back in the Neoplatonic tradition, like before the scientific revolution, those two are not in opposition. They are deeply interwoven so that you can have a sense of legitimacy and deep realness and grounding in your practices. We don't have that anymore. And I'm not advocating for religion. Neither am I an enemy of religion. I'll strengthen your case, by the way. So one of my RAs did research, and you get people who have committed themselves to cultivating wisdom, and you can look at people within religious traditions and people who are doing it in a purely secular framework. By many of the measures we use to try to study wisdom scientifically, the people in the religious paths do better than the secular. But here's the important point. There's no significant difference between the religious paths. So it's not like if you're, following the path of Judaism, you're more likely to end up wiser than if you follow Buddhism.
By the way, I don't know if that's my case. I was making the case that you don't need to have a religious affiliation to search for wisdom. It's that I thought along to the point you just made that it doesn't matter which religious affiliation or none.
But that's what I'm saying. Okay, so this is the tricky thing we're in.
Yeah.
It does matter if you're in one, but it doesn't matter sort of the propositional creeds of that. There's something else at work. If you'll allow me this, there's a functionality to religion that we lost when we rejected all the propositional dogma. But there's a functionality there that we don't know how to recreate.
Yeah, what is
well.
that? Can you try to speak to that? What is that functionality? What is that? Why is that so useful? A bunch of stories, a bunch of myths, a bunch of narratives
But I don't think
that are drenched in like deep lessons about morality and all those kinds of things. What's the functional thing there that can't be replaced without a religious text by a non-religious text?
This is, for me, the golden question. So thank you.
Do you have an answer?
Yeah, I have. I think I have a significant answer. I don't think it's complete, but I think it's important. And this is to step before the Cartesian revolution and think about many different kinds of knowing. And this is now something that is prominent within what's called 4E cognitive science, the kind of cognitive science I practice. And there's a lot of converging evidence for, okay, these different ways of knowing. There's propositional knowing. This is what we are most familiar with. In fact, it's almost has a tyrannical status, right? So this is knowing that something is the case, like that cats are mammals, and it's stored in semantic memory, and we have tests of coherence and correspondence and conviction, right? There's procedural knowing. This is knowing how to do something. Skills are not theories. They're not beliefs. They're not true or false. They engage the world or they don't. And they are stored in a different kind of memory. Procedural memory. Semantic memory can be damaged without any damage to procedural memory. That's why, you have the prototypical story of somebody suffering Alzheimer's and they're losing all kinds of facts, but they can still sit down and play the piano flawlessly. Same kind of argument. There's perspectival knowing. This is knowing what it's like to be you here now in this situation, in this state of mind, the whole field of your salience landscaping, what it's like to be you here now. And you have a specific kind of memory around that, episodic memory. And you have a different sense, you have a different criterion of realness. So you can get this by, my friend Dan Chiappia and I, we studied the scientists moving the rovers around, or you can take a look at people who are doing VR. People talk about, they want to really be in the game. That makes it real. They don't mean verisimilitude. You can get that, right? Sense of being in the game with something like Tetris, which it doesn't look like the real world. And you can fail to have it in a video game that has a lot of verisimilitude. It's something else. It's about, again, this kind of connectedness that we're talking about.
If I may interrupt, is that connected to the hard problem of consciousness, the subject, the qualia, or is that that kind of knowing, is that different from the qualia of consciousness?
I think it has to do with, I make a distinction between the adjectival and the adverbial qualia. So I think it has to do with the adverbial qualia much more than with the adjectival. So the adjectival qualia are like the greenness of green and the blueness of blue. The adverbial qualia are the here-ness, the now-ness, the togetherness.
Yeah.
And I think the perspectival knowing has a lot to do with the adverbial qualia.
Adjectival qualia and adverbial qualia. I'm learning so many new things today. Okay, so that's another way of knowing.
Right, the perspective, and then there's a deeper one. And this is a philosophical point, and I don't want to, we can go through the argument, right? But you don't have to know that you know in order to know, because if you start doing that, you get an infinite regress. There has to be kinds of knowing that doesn't mean you know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay, great. Okay, good. Well, there was a lot of ink spilled over that over a 40-year period. So
by philosophers, this is what they do. They spill ink.
Yeah. But I want to talk
paid for ink spillage.
So I want to talk about what I call participatory knowing. This is the idea that you and the world are co-participating in things, and such that real affordances exist between you. So both me and this environment are shaped by gravity. So the affordance of walking becomes available to me. Both me and a lot of this environment are shaped by my biology. And so affordances for that are here. Look at this cup. Shared physics, shared sort of biological factors. Look at my hand. I'm bipedal.
Yep.
Also, culture is shaping me and shaping this. I had to learn how to use that and treat it as a cup.
Yep.
So this is an agent arena relationship,
Mhm.
right? There's identities being created in your agency, identities being created in the world as an arena. So you and the world fit together. You know when that's missing, when you're really lonely or you're homesick or you're suffering culture shock. So this is participatory knowing, and it's the sense of, it comes with a sense of belonging.
At every level. So the ability to walk is a kind of
Yes,
knowing
yes, yes,
that that there's a dance between the physics that enables
yes.
this process, and just participating in the process is the act of knowing.
Right. And there's a really weird form of memory you have for this kind of knowing. It's called yourself.
What? Can you elaborate?
Well,
What do
you
you
do you so
what?
so we talked about how all the different other kinds of knowing had specific kinds of memory: semantic memory for propositional, procedural,
Yes.
right? Episodic for perspectival. What's the kind of memory that is the coordinated storehouse of all of your agent arena relationships, all the roles you can take, all the identities you can assume, all the identities you can
Yeah.
assign?
What's the self? Do you mean like consciousness, or
No,
like
I mean
some
your
kind of
sense of self.
sense of self in this world? That's not consciousness. That's
No,
like an agency or something.
right? It's an agent arena relationship.
And so in an agent arena relationship, it's the sense of the agent. Okay.
And that the agent belongs in that arena.
Whatever the agent is, whatever the arena is, because there's probably a bunch of
Yes.
different framings of how you experience that.
Yeah, and you have all within your identity as a self, you have all kinds of roles that are somehow contributing to that identity, but are not equivalent to that identity.
Yeah. I wonder if like my two hands have different, because there's a different experience of me picking up something with my right hand and then my left hand.
So
Are those like
that's a really cool question, Lex.
they certainly feel like their own things.
Hmm. And
But that could be just anthropomorphization based on cultural narratives and so on, and jokes and so
it
on.
could, but I think it's a legitimate empirical question because it also could be sort of Ian McGilchrist stuff. It could be you're using different hemispheres and they sort of have different agent arena relationships to the environment. This is a really important question in the cognitive science of the self. Does that hemispheric difference mean you're multiple or you actually have a singular self?
Oh, so it's important to understand how many cells are there.
Yes, I think so.
But that's just like a quirk of evolution. It's not. It surely can't be fundamental to cognition, having multiple cells or a singular self.
It depends. Again, because we're getting far from the answer to the question you originally asked me.
Yeah.
You want me to go back to that first or answer this one?
Which question? I already forgot everything.
What's the functionality of religion?
Yes.
Okay,
Let us
and you
return.
say, okay, and then we can return to the self. Okay, so you said you have all these propositions and et cetera, and they differ from the religions, and they don't seem to be considered legitimate by many people. But yet there's something functioning in the religions that is transforming people and making them wiser. And I put it to you that the transformations are largely occurring at those non-propositional levels: the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory. And those are the ones, by the way, that are more fundamentally connected to meaning making. Because remember, the propositions are representational and they're dependent on the non propositional, non representational processes of connectedness and relevance realization. So religion goes down deep to the non propositional and works there. Thus, the functionality we need to grasp.
Well, you talk about tools essentially that
Yeah.
humans are able to incorporate into their cognition. Psychotechnologies, like language, is one, I suppose. Uh, isn't religion then a psychotechnology?
It would be an ecology of psychotechnologies. Yes.
And the question is that Nietzsche ruined everything by saying God is dead. Do we have to invent the new thing? From the old phone, create the iPhone, invent the new psychotechnology that takes place of
Okay.
religion?
And so when the madman in Nietzsche's text goes into the marketplace, who's he talking to? He's not talking to the believers. He's talking to the atheists. And he says, do you not realize what we have done? Right? We have taken a sponge and
Mhm.
wiped away the sky. We are now forever falling. We are unchained from the sun. We have to become worthy of this.
Yeah. Well, Nietzsche is full of romantic bullshit, as we've
No, no,
already
no,
said.
no. But there's a point there.
Yes.
The point is, right? There's one thing to rejecting the proposition. There's another project of replacing the functionality that we lost when we reject the religion.
So his worry that as nihilism takes hold, you don't ever replace the thing that religion, the role that religion played in our
Maybe
world.
it's hard to tell what he actually, because he's so multivocal. I'll speak for me
Yeah.
rather than for Nietzsche. I think it is possible to, using the best cognitive science and respectfully exacting what we can from the best religion and philosophical traditions, because there's things like Stoicism that are on the gray line between philosophy and religion. Buddhism is the same. Doing that best cog sci, that best exaptation, we can come up with that functionality without having to buy into the particular propositional sets of the legacy religions. That's my proposal. I call that the religion that's not a religion.
So things like Stoicism or modern Stoicism, those things, don't you think in some sense they naturally emerge? Don't you think there's a longing for meaning?
So Stoicism arises during the Hellenistic period when there was a significant meaning crisis in the ancient world because of what had happened after the breakup of Alexander the Great's empire. So if you compare Aristotle to people who are living after Alexander, so Aristotle grows up in a place where everybody speaks the same, has a language, has the same religion. His ancestors have been there for years. He knows everybody. After Alexander the Great's empire is broken up, people are now thousands of miles away from the government. They're surrounded by people because of the diasporas, right? The diasporas, I should say. They're surrounded by people that don't speak their language, don't share their religion. That's why you get all these mother religions emerging, right? Universal mother religions like ISIS, etc. So there is what's called domicide. There's the killing of home. There's a loss of a sense of home and belonging and fittedness during the Hellenistic period, and Stoicism arose specifically to address that. And because it was designed to address a meaning crisis, it is no coincidence that it is coming back into prominence right now.
Well, there could be a lot of other variations, and
Totally.
it feels like, I think when you speak of the meaning crisis, you're in part describing,
Mm-hmm.
not prescribing. You're describing something that is happening, but I would venture to say that if we just leave things be, the meaning crisis dissipates because we long to create institutions, to create collective ideas. So this distributed cognition process that give us meaning. So if religion loses power, we'll find other institutions that are sources of meaning.
I don't.
Is that your intuition as well?
I think we are already doing that. I am involved with and do participant observation of many of these emerging communities that are creating ecologies of practice that are specifically about trying to address the meaning crisis. I just, in late July, I went to Washington State and did Rafe Kelly's Evolve, Move, Play, Return to the Source. And wow, one of the most challenging things I've ever done.
That guy is awesome, by the way. I've gotten to interact with him a long, long time ago.
He said to say hi to you, by the way.
Yeah, it's from another world. It feels like a different world because I interacted with him not directly, but so this is somebody. Maybe you can speak to what he works on, but he makes movement and play. And he encourages people to make that a part of their life, like how you move about the world,
Yeah.
whether that's as part of sort of athletic endeavors or actual just like walking around a city.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I ran into him is because there was a lot of interest in that in the athletic world, in the grappling world, in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu world, people who study movement, who make movement part of their lives, to see how can we integrate play and fun and just the basic humanness that's natural to our movement. How do we integrate that into our daily practice?
So
So this is yet another way to find meaning.
I think it's actually an exemplar of what I was talking about, because what's going on with Rafe's integration of parkour in nature, right, and martial arts, and mindfulness practices and dialogical practices is exactly, and explicitly so, by the way. He will tell you he's been very influenced by my work. He's trying to get at the non-propositional kinds of knowing that make meaning by evolving our sensory motor loop and enhancing our relevance realization, because that gives people profound improved sense of connectedness to themselves, to each other, and the world. And I'll tell you, Lex, I won't. I don't want to say I don't want to say too specifically the final thing that people did, because it's part of his secret sauce,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure, sure.
Right. But what I can say is, when it was done, I said to them all, I said, as far as I can tell, none of you are religious, right? And they go, yeah, yeah. And I said, but what you just did was a religious act, wasn't it? And they all went, yeah, it was.